the title has changed. The title was Human Wellbeing and the Irrelevance of Political Science. But this is going to appear in a edited volume on the relevance of political science, and the editors thought that irrelevance was too hard. So I changed it to the unsung relevance of political science. I tried to be the obedient professor is the happy professor. Okay, so what is this about? As many of you know, we have a large debate, especially in the United States, about the relevance of political science. This is the well-known United States Senator Colburn, who had launched a campaign with the United States Congress against any public funding of political science. And there has been several attempts by the American political science to fight this back. So far, surprisingly unsuccessful. We have Jeffrey Isaac, who is the editor of the policy-oriented publication of the American Political Science Association, and he writes that, now this is an interview with him, we're kidding ourselves if we think this research typically has the obvious public benefit we claim for. We political scientists can and should do a better job of making public relevance of our work clearer and doing more relevant work. One of the legends in political science is also interviewed in this not so unknown journal, in New York Times. Now he says, the danger is that political science is moving in the direction of saying more and more about less and less. And one of the big names in international relations, Stephen Wolf at Harvard, saying that our scholarship is often impenetrable to outsiders, largely because it is not intended for their consumption. It is written primarily to appeal to other members of the profession. Now, if you try to think about this debate, you have, of course, to start with the first question. If political science is going to be relevant, for what? What is it going to be relevant for? And one of the other legends in political science, Rothstein, one of the big names in policy analysis, he thought that what we should do was to speak truth to power. We should advise the prince, to educate the princes, so to speak. And of course, there are people doing this. Many of our colleagues in the social sciences don't think that they are very successful in this. But I would leave that for other people to contemplate about how good we are in giving good advice to those who are ruling our societies. Then, of course, you can be a public intellectual, you can write op-ed articles, you can take part in public discussions. I'm, in my own country, one of the sinners in this type of activity, so I will not speak about it. I don't think I should evaluate myself here. Some people in the profession do a lot of work as public intellectuals, especially in my own country, I think, far less so in the United States. An interesting thing, I had a young colleague doing the figures. As Hans-Peter Neumann from the department where we like to measure, as my colleague Søren Holmberg says, if you can measure figure skating in the Olympics, you can measure anything. And so he measured with the standard things you measure, academic international record And then, of course, you can measure now how often colleagues appear in the public debate. And one of the surprises is that these two measures are completely unrelated. Completely. So I have some colleagues who are both internationally well recognized and take part in the public debate. I have some colleagues who are only internationally recognized but never seen in the public debate. I have a lot of colleagues who are only seen in the public debate, not in the international research community. And then, unfortunately, the largest group are minor. But what I want to speak about here is something else. It is political science, can political science be relevant for human well-being? Let's go back to Plato. Plato, he made 3 journeys to Syracuse, well known, where he tried to educate the kingdom. And he came back extremely disappointed. All of it turned out to be completely in vain. Despite all of his good advice, the king turned to be changed from an enlightened king to a simple tyrant. Yes, this comes from the Quality of Government Institute at the University of Gothenburg. We started in 2004. We then got the minor grant to build a database. Since we are dealing with quite sensitive topics like corruption and clientelism and other types of malpractice in the public sector, I would like to underline that we are an independent academic research institute. We do not take orders from anyone, not even the European Union Commission. It's basically a political science operation, but we have a lot of interaction with colleagues from other disciplines, sociology, anthropology, economics, law, history, whatever. It's now quite a large operation. We got this type of Centers of Excellence funding in 2007 and then again in 2009. So we have been operating on about 10 million euros. For now, we are about 25 researchers, and as we speak, we are recruiting another 6 researchers from the ERC Advanced Grant that will make this operation last until I retire in 2019. Yeah, why did we start this operation, the Quality of Government Institute? Well, it was to a large extent by chance. I had a PhD student who was studying water management in Zimbabwe. And I didn't know much about this, but he put me in contact with the people from our technical university who study water, hydrogeologists and hydro something else. And this is what they have to say. About 12 to 14,000 people die every day due to lack of access to safe water. 2/3 are children. The surprising thing they told us was that this has very little to do with the lack of natural water. This explains only a little fraction of it. And then came an even bigger surprise. They told us, we have been convincing the international aid and development community to invest heavily in technical equipment, like sewages and water cleaning stations and stuff. And it doesn't help. Why? For 2 reasons. The procurement system in many of these countries is so hopelessly corrupt that the technical installations that are to be placed simply fall apart after a few years. And/or many people in these countries simply refuse to pay for the water because they are convinced that the money will be stolen or go into the wrong pockets. So the few honest water managers who really try to keep these installments working usually don't have money to keep them. So this, they told us, this is basically a problem about governance and corruption. We have to collaborate, basically. And this was, of course, something we really couldn't say no to. I hadn't thought about this actually until they convinced us that this was the case. The other problem is what I call, for political scientists, the problem from hell. Yes, we are living in a time, although there have been a few drawbacks the last years, we're living in a time with a fantastic success for democracy. When I was a student, countries like, it's difficult to think about today, Greece, Spain, Portugal were bloody dictatorships, then they fell, became democracies. Then large parts of Latin America, and then of course Eastern Europe, many countries in Asia. Today we have democracy in places you couldn't really imagine only about 10 years ago. Indonesia, Senegal, Taiwan. It's a miracle, of course. Something to be very happy. But now comes the bad news. If you take our best measure of democracy and correlate it with all the data we have in our database about human well-being, there is very little effect. One example is, a very tragic example, is South Africa. Marvelously became a democracy without falling into full-scale civil war 20 years ago. But today, the expected living is down 6 years. The number of women who die when they give birth has tripled. There is no increase in the average months they can send children to school. And it's today it used to be Brazil, today it's South Africa, that has the world record in economic growth. Another example that was pointed at by the Nobel laureate Amartya Sen 2 years ago in an article in the New York Review of Books. And as many of you know, Sen has always been hailing the Indian democracy, being himself of Indian descent. But we now have to realize the fact that authoritarian communist China outperforms liberal democratic India on every conceivable measure of human well-being. Take any child mortality, how many of the 10-year-old that can read, how many girls that go to school, anything. And you will see this. Now we have two hopes. The first hope for development was, of course, the Washington Consensus, basically saying deregulate, privatize, let the market rule. This is a quote from my favorite economist, one of them, Daniel Roderick. He says, the encounter between neoclassical economics and the developing societies serve to reveal the institutional underpinnings of market economies. A clearly limited system of property rights, a regulatory apparatus curbing the worst forms of fraud, anti-competitive behavior and overhasl, a moderately cohesive society exhibiting trust and social cooperation, social and political institutions that mitigate risk and manage social conflict, the rule of law and clean government. And then it comes. These are social arrangements that economists usually take for granted, but which are conspicuous by their absence in poor countries. This is, of course, nothing but a cry for help. The second failure, unfortunately, has been democracy. This is Larry Diamond, one of the leading democratization scholars, writing in 2007. There is a spectre hunting democracy in the world. It's bad governance, governance that is drenched in corruption, patronage, favoritism, and abuse of power, where power confers virtually unchecked opportunities for personal, factional, and party enrichment. It is difficult, if not impossible, to sustain democratic rules of faith. The democratic spirit of elections drowns in vote buying, rigging, violence, or all three. So, my starting point is the the idea about equality from Amartya Sen. Basically saying that most of us would prefer in a country where few newborns die, most children survive by failure, almost all 10 years old can read, people live a long and reasonably healthy life, where child deprivation is low, where few women die when they give birth, where the percentage of people living in poverty is low, where many report to be reasonably satisfied with their lives, and where most say that most other people can be trusted. And when corruption is low, I would like to add, and when the public coffers are vacant. This is what is needed to create what Sen and his followers say is the basic of equality during campaign. So what should democracies do? What is reasonable to expect? I think it's reasonable that if you have a system based on that the will of the people will rule, you should see increases in human well-being. If a country democratizes, we should see fewer newborns die. I think also that we shouldn't end up where Greece is. I'm not arguing against Keynesianism, but public finances must be sustained. And I happen to think that if you introduce democracy, corruption should go in. So, what are the facts? I will just show you some very simple Hungarian correlations here. We have carried out all the more sophisticated statistical work, but I will not bore you with any regression analysis. This is just, take a look at the data. This is my favorite measure of human well-being. It's not how long you live, but how long you can expect to live a reasonably healthy life. And this is for what is now, I think, the best measure of the level of democracy. It's a combination of polity, how well the elections are carried out, and from Freedom House, how well basic democratic rights are respected. And as you can see, democracy doesn't give you anything. Democracy doesn't correlate at all with human livelihoods, healthy livelihoods. However, let's change to control of corruption. One of the measures we have. There are many measures of quality of government. Basically, they are correlated at 0.1 level, so you can use anyone you like. I have taken the control of corruption, but you can use rule of law, government effectiveness, or our own measure that we created about quality of government. It doesn't matter. But this is how it goes. If you change to control of corruption, you really get something. This is not perfect, of course, but interesting correlation. Then you can take the famous United Nations Human Development Index and correlate it with democracy. It doesn't give you much, as you can see. But again, if you change to control of corruption, bam, there you get something. Do you get happier living in a democracy? Not much, unfortunately. Again, change to control of corruption, and you get something. There is John Helliwell, Canadian economist, have carried out a huge regression analysis with, I think, now 110 interviews or events in the World Value Survey. It turns out there are two things that make people really unhappy. One is if you are not feeling well. The other one is if you live under corrupt or discriminatory or dysfunctional government institutions. You do get happier with money, but only up to the level Sweden had when I was a teenager. Everything about $24,000 a year really doesn't change. Yeah, this is a little fun. This is foreign credit rating from Standard & Poor's credit rating, basically saying if a country has its public finances under control. You have Greece here. And we correlate that with democracy. Does it give you anything? Absolutely not. However, again, change to control of corruption, we get quite strong correlation. And of course, money. You will get richer living in a democracy? Really not. But take a look at this. corruption, you are much more likely to live in a prosperous society. Yeah, and of course, worst thing, as you can see, democracy and control of corruption is not correlated, but the curve is actually U-shaped. The worst corrupt countries are the newly democratized ones here, or the semi-democratized ones. A number, I think, can be measured, quite authoritarian countries that have corruption reasonably. Singapore is, of course, the big outlier. Now, many of you will say, we don't really have democracy in order to create good outcomes. We have democracy to create political legitimacy. If we can vote the rascals in and out, we will accept them. And they're rude. And it's, of course, we take it for granted that it's democratic rights that is the main source of political legitimacy. What does the data say? This is a quote from Bruce Gilley. He has data for World Value study for, I think, 73 countries. He says, general governance, the composite of the rule of law, control of corruption, and government effectiveness, clearly has a large, even overarching importance in global citizens' evaluation of the legitimacy of states. It is notable, he says, that democratic rights, while certainly qualifying as one of the most important causes of legitimacy, turn out to be roughly on par with welfare gains, and both these are far less important than good governance. This is from a Norwegian colleague, Gibson. He's even harsher, using the same data. He says it is quality of government, the impartial treatment on the output side of the political system, and not electoral democracy that create machine legitimacy. And the final verdict is from my two colleagues at the Koch Institute, and they say, and they use these election studies, comparative election studies data, and they say, overall, the results indicate that factors such as government effectiveness are of greater importance for citizen satisfaction with the way democracy functions compared to factors like ideological congruence or the inclusive. Impartial and effective bureaucracies matter more than representational devices. Now, for most political theorists, and many who study representation, this comes as a big surprise. But I think I've been thinking a lot about other theories. One way to think about it from the micro level is the following. In most elections, about a third of the electorate even doesn't bother to vote. Even fewer participate in demonstrations, write op-ed articles, or sign petitions. Or you may be a Republican living in New York City. Your vote will never count in the presidential elections. You will be forever outvoted. What I have news, nothing happens. Their life will just continue. However, if you cannot afford to pay the bribes to the hospital for when your children are ill, if the police won't protect you because you belong to a minority, if you won't get that job in the public sector because you're a woman or you belong to the wrong political party, if the fire brigade won't come when you call them because you live in the wrong part of the city, you are in deep trouble. So from a micro-level perspective, I think this is not so surprising. It's only the mindset of the political theorists that I think this is nice. So, to summarize so far, almost all standard measures of human well-being, they are more related to dysfunctional political institutions. I think, and I will not speak a lot about this, I think the causality here runs in two ways. Low quality of government has a very detrimental effect on social trust. We have experimental, natural experiments, and tons of survey data for this. And this is a little new idea. I think it also has a strong effect on the competence in the public administration. Basically, if you don't have meritocratic recruitment, but recruitment of political cronies, you will run into problems running the public sector. This is not an insignificant problem. Think of former president in South Africa, Thabo Mbeki. If he could have been surrounded by knowledgeable, meritocratic recruited experts instead of his political cronies, maybe he wouldn't have said the idiotic things he said about HIV and AIDS, which according to a conservative estimation has costed 340 South Africans death. I think this is not a problem that is only related to the development of former communist countries. I think actually an overwhelming part of human misery in today's world is caused by dysfunctional institutions. Not, for example, by lack of medical cures or medicines or technicalities. This is actually also the word from the General Secretary of the World Health Organization. One of our latest articles is titled "Dying of Corruption." This should have some implications for research in political science, does it? I would say no. For a very simple reason, most political scientists are actually interested in explaining politics, not what politics implies for human welfare. They want to explain who participates in elections, or who wins elections, or why some laws are enacted, or why some interest organizations have influence. But what all this means for human well-being is basically a big black hole in political science. The data. As many of you know, the publishing houses are publishing handbooks nowadays. And you can of course read these handbooks in order to educate yourself. But it's more fun, I think, to read them and say, what's not in the handbooks? What is missing? Is there anything about this relation between state capacity, control of corruption, quality of government, and human well-being in the Oxford Handbook of Comparative Institutional Analysis? No. It doesn't even have an index entry on corruption. In political economy? No. In comparative politics? Yes. There is a chapter about clientelism, which is voted by in sort of public administration. But it's written by an economist, not by political science. Handbook of Political Theory, nothing. Absolutely nothing. Handbook of the Welfare State is amazing. It's like if you could have welfare policies that were sort of automatically implemented without mentioning words like bureaucracy, administration, civil servants. There is nothing about it. The Handbook of Political Institutions, no, nothing. Handbook of Public Policy, nothing. Handbook of Public Management, nothing. Handbook of Political Behavior, I'm sorry, nothing. Here is a chapter. I wrote it. So this is a black hole. Can you check this out? Well, the flagship American Political Science Review, between 1990 and 2010, published only 6 articles that has corruption as a keyword, meaning it's in the keyword abstract or impact. This is out of 904 articles. Of the 211 articles published by APSR during the last 5 years, only one has the term poverty in the abstract or keyword. The same surprisingly low result goes for terms like human welfare, human development, and infant mortality. The scores for literacy and life satisfaction is 0. There is none. The flagship in comparative politics, 0 for literacy, human well-being, infant mortality during the last 10 years. I have a personal experience that I would like to share with you. This is a title of an article that I and 3 colleagues published in the leading development journal, World Development. It has the title Bad Governance and Poor Children, a comparative analysis of government efficiency and severe child deprivation in 68 low and middle income countries. The data here is phenomenal. It's collected group of sociologists in Bristol. It's 2.1 million children. For each child, there are 7 data points. If they have access to safe water, to education, to information, to food, to housing, and so on. So this is just unbelievably good data. And what we did was that we correlated, is there an effect of democracy or is it an effect of control of corruption? So we sent it. Yeah. What we show is that the quality of government affected 4 of the deprivation indicators, but democratization appears to have no impact on child deprivation. So it's the same that I've shown here. Now, what do the power holders in political science think about the importance of how political institutions affect child deprivation? We sent it to the leading journal in comparative politics, comparative political studies, like Jim Capurasco. He sent us, he didn't even send it out to review. He said, "Thank you very much for sending your manuscript to comparative political studies. It looks like an interesting manuscript, and it certainly contains a lot of data from the country. There is much in it that is unknown. However, I don't think comparative political science is the right choice." So, they are basically uninterested in it. It was immediately accepted by the development, so I'm not complaining. What explains this lack of interest in state capacity? I think there are 4 explanations, and here I am. I'm very much in agreement with the now very well-known article by the American political scientist Francis Fukuyama, published in the journal titled Governance, and it has the title, "What is Governance?" I think neoliberal ideology, especially in American political science, has been very important. Taming the beast, controlling the state, has been seen as much more important than understanding what the animal can actually do. I think rational choice and public choice has had a detrimental effect. Basically, in this approach, the state is seen as a predatory machine in the interest of self-interest politicians and bureaucrats, unable to produce or act in the common interest of to produce any public or merit goods. I think it's interesting that Marxists, or also identity group Foucault type of theory, actually thinks the same as the rational choice equals. The state is always biased against the working class, minorities, or other suppressed groups, so they have not been interested. You would think that public administration scholars should have been interested in this. They are not. They are only interested in the internal working of the machine, not the machine of the machine can do for human well-being. I also think that they didn't want to enter into this corruption, quality of government, good governance debate because they didn't want to give public administration a bad reputation. They wanted to resemble business tools. How does political theory feel this? Well, my colleagues in political theory, if they are, when they are, and they are quite often interested in suggesting solutions to real-world problems like social justice, equality, well-being. We actually had a conference here at this place in late January on diversity and the welfare state. But they do this without considering at all 2 very important things. One is, can my policy suggestions at all be implemented without falling into hopeless bureaucratic nightmares? And is there any chance, given what we know about electoral support and people's opinions about different welfare policies, is there any chance that their suggestions will be able to get enough electoral support? This is things that they completely ignore. For example, the egalitarians completely ignore the hopeless bureaucratic nightmares that their suggestions would resulting, and the many people that argue for unconditional basic income completely ignore what is known from studies in electoral and opinion support for welfare state policies. I think this is like if medical researchers would propose treatments without considering well-known and serious side effects. I wish the egalitarians all the luck in the world, because they really need it. Now, there is, of course, a fear of being policy relevant, especially, I think, in many American political science departments. If you are policy relevant, you're not a really serious scholar doing real basic work. I completely disagree. I think there is actually no such thing in the social sciences as a difference between basic and applied research. I think this is a charade. People who say I'm doing basic research only, I don't know what that would look like. My three arguments come from the three Nobel laureates that are closest to political science. Take John Nash. He starts with a very, very applied question. How should we avoid a nuclear war between the superpowers? That is from where we got the famous Nash equilibrium, right? Take Douglas North. He starts with a very, very applied question. Why are some countries so extremely much richer than others? And take the only formal political science connected person who got this prize, Eleanor Roosevelt. She starts with an extremely applied question. How on earth should we conserve the water in Southern California? That is where we start. Now, if you can get the Nobel Prize on extremely basic research starting from these applied questions, I think this is a charade saying that we should not do more applied work because it's so serious. I think basically public administration, and I think it's very bad that it is, in many cases, not in my country, but in many countries left outside the realm of political science. I think of myself as a public administration scholar masquerading as a political science. My favorite argument comes from a novel written in 1961 by the then quite famous British author Malcolm Muggeridge. This is what he says. I'm sorry for the novel. I have always been deeply interested in the administrative side of life, which I find much more absorbing than its purely erotic aspects. What Lady Shapley and her gatekeeper did in the woods is to me of only passive interest compared with how they got there. What arrangements were made for shelter in the case of inclement weather, and for refreshments, how they accounted for their absence, whether either party could recover incidental expenses, and if so, how? This attitude is, after all, not so unreasonable. Most great generals have admitted that planning campaigns and winning victories in the field is easy compared with arranging transport and supplies. If the administrative arrangements are faulty, the campaign which follows cannot be but laborious, and even victory brings little satisfaction. To summarize, most human misery in this world is caused by the fact that the majority of the world's population live under dysfunctional, corrupt, and clientelistic government institutions. Political science should be the discipline that knows most about the relation between state capacity and human well-being. Government institutions should be our home turf. This is not so, unfortunately, because the main part of the discipline has politics and not human well-being as the main dependent variable. And we paintings. This is a painting painted in 1896 by Irrelevance. It is a mural painting if you enter the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. And if you look very closely, you can see it's titled Good Government here. What does it show? Well, this is the government, the well-dressed, what happened here? I'm sorry.
He went out.
Oh, 1 second. Yeah, this is the government, the woman. She's well-dressed, virtuous. The scale is even, and this is the man who is voting. And he has studied, you can see he has books and he's educated. And they don't have a contact, he doesn't look for special favors. This is the woman who pays her taxes, right? And she doesn't look for special favors. So this is what good government entails. Educated people, and when people pay the taxes, they shouldn't look for special favors, no plan. But there is another painting on the opposite of the wall, and it's called Corrupt Legislation. And here you can see the legislator as a woman, what should we say, with maybe too little clothes. She's not really virtuous. You can see her scale is not even. Now, this man here is well dressed, he has shoes, he has a lot of money, and he puts money into his scale. And his factories, they are working well. Now, this is the poorly dressed woman. She has no shoes, her factories are idle, and she gets a very stern look here because she cannot offer anything. Right? So, the problem was well known in 1896, and we can question why it has taken political science so long to realize how serious it is. Anyway.